Allahu, 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 Allah, Allahu, Allahu.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي إن الحمد لله نستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أفضل الحديث كلام الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. Dear sisters and brothers, last week we started talking about Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and Al-Quds, Jerusalem, and we were trying to emphasize the links that every Muslim should have to this place. We are not discussing the politics of the area, we are discussing the spiritual links we have and should have to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and to Jerusalem. Now we started by emphasizing a fact that the life of one human being, the life of any believer, is more honorable to Allah than Al-Kaaba itself, let alone Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. So any bloodshed is more harmful than actually even demolishing Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa or Al-Kaaba, as the Prophet ﷺ said in his famous hadith. We went on to discuss the definition of a masjid, the word masjid because it's usually translated into mosque in English. We then went on to discuss the building of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and who built it. And we discussed the meaning of the word Al-Aqsa. We discussed the holiness and the significance of the land around Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, i.e. the whole of Jerusalem. We then went on to discuss the history of the place from an Islamic or from a spiritual perspective. So I'm not going to go through all this again, but I'm just going to remind you, we got to the time where the Ba'athah of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ started, and we touched very quickly on Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj. And the ayah that says سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله لنريه من آياتنا إنه هو السميع البصير. And we ended up by emphasizing the importance of this, and we indicated clearly that Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj was a turning point in not just Islamic history, but in human history. Because, as we said, Allah could have made His Prophet travel up to the skies without having to go to Jerusalem first. The fact that the Isra happened was for a simple thing, that the Prophet traveled to Jerusalem, he led the prayer with all the prophets that came before him. And this was a clear indication from Allah that this is the final religion, and that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is the seal of all prophets, and that anything that came before is null and void. And now it is the way forward is to follow the ways of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and to follow Islam as we know it today. So there is no argument about Jerusalem, Solomon's temple, whatever, because all these prophets, as we indicated, are prophets of Islam anyway. So there is no argument there. And the fact that the Prophet ﷺ did the Isra and the Mi'raj then makes it quite clear that this question is no more a place for discussion. Now let's just go a bit further to the time of Islam and Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. Now, what was Jerusalem like during this time? During this time, the Romans and the Persians were the two major powers in the world. So it's like the USSR and the United States at one time. It was the Romans and the Persians. In 613, Damascus fell to the Persians. And then the Persians surrounded in 614 Jerusalem and managed to enter it. Now, here is the history of this place, which shows the difference between what Islam is like and what other people are like. When the Persians entered Jerusalem, they slaughtered 90,000 people in cold blood. Most of them were Christians, by the way. So the Persians slaughtered 90,000 Christians when they entered Jerusalem. They also desecrated all the holy places of the Christians. And they even stole the cross that the Christians believed Jesus was crucified on. So no respect at all to human life, no respect to other people's beliefs. Now, at that time, the Jews allied themselves to the Persians, whereas the Muslims allied themselves to the Romans because they were Christians at that time. They were muwahhideen. And this is one of the very interesting miracles of the Quran, where in Surah Al-Rum it starts with أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ألف لام ميم غلبت الروم في أدنى الأرض وهم من بعد غلبهم سيغلبون في بضع سنين. This ayah was revealed to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ at the time that the Persians had conquered the Romans. And the ayah says that the Romans have been conquered. في أدنى الأرض. And this is again something we understand now. Adna means the lowest point. As a matter of fact, where the battle occurred, it was in the lowest point on earth geographically. وَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ غَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ. And then the Quran predicted that the Romans are going to overcome the Persians. فِي بِضْعِ سِنِينَ. And bid'a in the Arabic language means anything between 3 and 9 years. And this is exactly what happened when the Romans then managed to fight back and regain control of Jerusalem. At that time, they were ruled by an emperor called Heraclius. And he's the one who led them and retook Jerusalem. Unfortunately, he made Al-Aqsa, they made the Aqsa, the area, as I said, the Aqsa is not just the mosque, it was the area, a dumpster. Now, at that time, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was starting to write to the leaders of the world to invite them to Islam. And amongst these leaders were Heraclius, where the Prophet wrote him a letter inviting him to Islam. Heraclius was quite a pious man, and he felt that he needed to investigate this further. So he asked whether there were anybody from the Arab Peninsula visiting, and at that time there was, because there was trade between the two countries. And there was a group of people there led by Abu Sufyan. Now at that time, Abu Sufyan was not a Muslim yet. So Heraclius asked them to come to his presence, to come to his castle. And he asked them about Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. It's a very famous story. It's a long story. We don't have time to go through the details. However, it's very interesting that Abu Sufyan, who was not a Muslim at that time, and if anything, his staunch enemy was Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Yet when he asked him about him, he said that he was an honest man. That's Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He said he was a noble man. And he said that his companions are on the increase. At which Heraclius identified Prophet Muhammad as being a prophet because he was quite knowledgeable from the books, from their own books. And Heraclius actually considered accepting the da'wah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But unfortunately, the people around him rejected this idea, and they threatened to overthrow him if he wished to accept the da'wah of Islam. And that's why he never accepted the da'wah of Islam. Now, later on, after the death of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was a famous battle, Ma'arakat al-Yarmouk, in 637. After which, the Muslims were in a position to enter Jerusalem. And this was during the ruling of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Umar ibn al-Khattab. However, the arrangement was that Umar had to come personally to take the keys of Jerusalem. And it was very unusual at that time for a leader whose country is at war to leave his capital and to travel. And of course, at these times, we know how long traveling took. But anyhow, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab accepted the invitation and decided to travel to Jerusalem. Very famous story was that Sayyidina Umar was traveling with his servant, and they were both sharing one camel. So part of the trip, Sayyidina Umar would ride the camel, another part his servant would ride, and a third part they would let the camel rest. Sayyidina Umar only had one cloak to wear, which he was traveling with. So when they approached Jerusalem, it was his servant's turn to be riding the camel. So Sayyidina Umar was just holding the camel in his single cloak. He'd been through mud, so he was quite muddy. And the servant said, look, it's not appropriate, we're going there. These people are used to the rulers being great, and they go in processions and so on. And Sayyidina Umar refused. He said, no, fair is fair. It's your turn to ride, so you will ride. And so he entered Jerusalem walking and dragging the camel that was ridden by his servant. And when he was asked by one of the Sahaba, come on, you're coming here, you know how these people are. They value very much appearances. They expect huge processions. At least you could have showered or had a bath and changed your clothes. And he said a very famous word that stands then and stood then and still stands today, and we should learn from it. He said, نحن قوم أعذنا الله بالإسلام وإذا ابتغينا العزة في غيره أذلنا الله. We are people who Allah has honored by Islam. And if we try to seek honor in anything else but Islam, i.e. appearance, clothes, processions, then Allah is going to not allow us to have any more of this honor. He's going to dishonor us. And of course, we can see what's happening today, and that's exactly, unfortunately, what's happening to Muslims around the world today. Anyway, when Umar al-Khattab entered Jerusalem, at that time there was a patriarch who was in charge of the Eastern Christian Church. His name is Patriarch Sophronius. And he's a very unique man. He was a very good man, but a very unique man, because he is the only, or one of the very few patriarchs, one of the very few people who was made a saint later on after his death by both the Orthodox Church and by the Eastern Church. So anyway, the patriarch invited Sayyidina Umar to show him around Jerusalem and show him where everything is. And as he was showing him the church, the time for prayer came. So he invited him to pray inside the church. And Sayyidina Umar said, no. If I pray inside the church, then later on people will come and say, Umar prayed here, and they might convert this church to a mosque. So he insisted on getting out of the church and prayed outside the church. Anyway, when the Muslims entered Jerusalem, they entered it without one drop of blood being shed. That's the difference. Remember, I told you when the Persians entered, they slaughtered 90,000 people, desecrated all the Christian churches. Whereas when the Muslims entered, not one drop of blood was shed. And if anything at all, Sayyidina Umar then gave them a treaty called Al-Umariyah, which you can refer to and read it, which gives them freedom of worship. And it guarantees the safety of the churches and the safety of the priests and the safety of everybody to worship God whichever way they want. And you can read this, it's available actually, the actual word to word of Al-Umariyah, the treaty is available. Now, because of the time constraints, we're going to fast forward a bit. So anyhow, Jerusalem and the Masjid al-Aqsa stayed under the ruling of the Muslims. So we fast forward now to year 1099, when the Crusaders entered Jerusalem. And what did they do? They slaughtered 70,000 Muslims in cold blood. So the first thing they did was to slaughter 70,000 Muslims. And they entered the Masjid al-Aqsa. They set the Jewish synagogue and the Eastern Church on fire. During this time, the synagogue was full of Jewish people seeking sanctuary in it. And the Eastern Church had Christians seeking sanctuary in it. So they closed the doors and they burned them both alive. So apart from the 70,000 Muslims who were slaughtered, other people of other faiths, even Christian faiths but a different church, were burnt alive. And again, this highlights the difference between what the Muslims do when they have the upper hand and what other people do when they have the upper hand. There came after that, a part of the Crusaders called the Knights of the Templar, and sometimes they called themselves the Order of Solomon, and made Al-Masjid al-Aqsa their headquarters, and renamed it Solomon's Temple. Now it's interesting that they entered Al-Masjid al-Aqsa with their horses, and up till this very day, if you see documentaries about Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, you'll find places which are underground where they used to tie their horses. So this holy place was made into a dump. And they used to tie their horses. And up till this very day, the place where they put the rings to tie their horses is still present. And it's an indicator of how this holy place was treated then. So anyway, let's fast forward again and go to the year 1187. When Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi managed to retake Jerusalem. And this was on the 27th of Rajab. He entered Jerusalem. Now, interestingly, some of the people in Jerusalem, anticipating that he's going to do to them what they did to the Muslims when they entered Jerusalem, committed suicide. But what happened was the total opposite. When Salah ad-Din entered Jerusalem, he granted everybody amnesty. He did not murder anybody. He even sent cold water to the prisoners that they had. He allowed Christians who did not pose any threat to live safely, indefinitely in Jerusalem. When he removed the crosses that were put over Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, he did not destroy them or burn them. He handed them over to the Christian leaders, to the patriarch at that time. So again, this highlights the difference between Muslims' attitude, what they do, how they treated people, and how they were treated when the tables were turned. After that, Jerusalem stayed for 400 years under the ruling of the Ottoman Empire. All religions coexisted in Jerusalem. Everybody was allowed to worship. Jews, Muslims, Christians, there was complete freedom and peace during the whole rule of the Muslims. Now, when Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi entered Jerusalem, he had a meeting with Richard the Lion's Heart, who was the King of England, and he was leading at that time the armies in Jerusalem. And when King Richard asked him, what is the value of Jerusalem to you? What is the value of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa to you? And he said, Jerusalem is the place where our Prophet ascended to the heavens. And it's going to be the gathering place on the Day of Judgment. So don't imagine that we will ever give it up. And I think this is an important lesson for us today. Don't let anybody imagine that we will ever, as Muslims, give up Jerusalem. We will never give up Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. There's a hadith of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that says, لا تزال طائفة من أمتي ظاهرين على الحق لعدوهم قاهرين لا يضرهم من خذلهم وهم لعدوهم خاذلين. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ predicted that there's going to be a group of my ummah, of my people, who are always going to be there with the truth, with the haqq. And even if people let them down, it's not going to affect them. And they're always going to overcome at the end of the day. And these are the people who are now safeguarding Al-Masjid al-Aqsa under the Israeli rule in Jerusalem. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له الملك الحق المبين وأشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله. So dear brothers and sisters, as I said, we don't want to go too much into the politics of what's happening today, and we need to just draw a very clear distinction between Zionism and Judaism. Because Zionism is a political movement. And there are Jewish Zionists and there are Christian Zionists. As a matter of fact, Christian Zionists are probably more than Jewish Zionists, and they are much stronger. But anyway, that's not our domain. As I said, we don't want to discuss the politics of it. But let's try to understand why is what's happening now, and what's going to happen in the future. I'll just have to go through that very quickly because we're running out of time. But the Quran has made it very clear to us. If you refer to Surah Al-Isra, in verse 104, Allah is talking about Bani Israel, the Jews. And it says, when it says, وَقُلْنَا مِنْ بَعْدِهِ لِبَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ اسْكُنُوا الْأَرْضِ فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ الْآخِرَةِ جِئْنَا بِكُمْ لَفِيفًا. And Allah told the Jews after Sayyidina Musa, so as I said, there's no time to go into the details, but anyhow, he told them, iskunu al-ard. So dwell the lands. He did not specify which land they were going to dwell. He did not say dwell the Holy Land, or dwell Egypt, or dwell England. He said dwell the land, which is an indication that the Jews were going to be spread all over the world, and that's what happened. Remember? The Jews were all over the world. Every country had a Jewish community. This is what Allah has ordained after they've, because of what they've done in the past. Now, let's go back to the same surah. and find that it says, وَقَضَيْنَا إِلَى بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ فِي الْكِتَابِ لَتُفْسِدُنَّ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَالْمَرَّتَيْنِ وَلَتَعْلُنَّ عُلُوًّا كَبِيرًا. And that we have declared to the children of Israel in the book, and that's, by the way, their book, that twice you will be making mischief in the land, and you will commit transgression, and twice we are going to then punish you for that. However, it says, لَتُفْسِدُنَّ فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَّتَيْنِ وَلَتَعْلُنَّ عُلُوًّا كَبِيرًا. But on the second time, you're going to get to heights, great heights, very, very great heights. So what's going to happen? فإذا جاء وعد أولاهما بعثنا عليكم عبادا لنا أولي بأس شديد فجاسوا خلال الديار وكان وعدا مفعولا. After the first time, we are going to send people to punish you and, sort of get you all over the place, which is what's been happening before. ثم رددنا لكم الكرة. Then we give you back power. And this is what's happening today. ثم رددنا لكم الكرة. Then we are going to give you back the power. وأمددناكم بأموال وبنين. And we're going to give you lots of money and lots of children. And who is controlling the economy of the world today? Who has most of the money of the world today? This is exactly what Allah has ordained in His book. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ أَكْثَرَ نَفِيرًا. And we made you the people who can control the media. You have got your word going everywhere in the world. Who's controlling the media today in the world? So all the promises that Allah has made to them is being fulfilled today. However, let's read the rest of the ayah. إِنْ أَحْسَنْتُمْ أَحْسَنْتُمْ لِأَنفُسِكُمْ وَإِنْ أَسَأْتُمْ فَلَهَا. If you do well, you're going to do well for yourself. However, if you do mischief, it's going to be against you. فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ الْآخِرَةِ. So when the promise of the second time, the second promise that Allah has made, لِيَسُوءُ وُجُوهَكُمْ وَلْيَدْخُلُوا الْمَسْجِدَ كَمَا دَخَلُوهُ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ وَلْيَتَّبَّرُوا مَا عَلَوْا تَدْبِيرًا. Then our ibad, our worshippers, our slaves are going to enter al-masjid, Masjid al-Haram, كَمَا دَخَلُوهُ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. So it's a promise of Allah. We, the Muslims, inshallah, once they qualify as Ibad al-Rahman, once they qualify as the people they should be, once they qualify as the slaves of Allah, which unfortunately we are not today, then this is when we are going to regain al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and this is when we are going to regain al-Quds, inshallah. But it is a promise of Allah, and Allah always fulfills His promise. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم اكفنا بحلالك عن حرامك واغننا بفضلك عمن سواك. اللهم ارحمنا بترك المعاصي أبدا ما أحييتنا وارحمنا بترك ما لا يعنينا وارزقنا حسن النظر فيما يرضيك عنا وألزم قلوبنا حفظ كتابك كما علمتنا واشرح به صدورنا ونور به قلوبنا وأطلق به ألسنتنا واجعلنا نتلوه كما تحب وترضى وكما يرضيك عنا يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وأدخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. عباد الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. فاذكروا الله يذكركم واستغفروه يغفر لكم وأقم الصلاة يرحمك الله.